Here with a very special guest, Lucian Baza.
Hey, what's up, man?
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having me. My debut album, Roy, self-titled, is out on April 8th, and it comes along with a 45-minute visual movie, Roy the Film, which starts streaming on April 15th. Dialogue and a whole world on the screen, three of which are already out. They're the music videos brought to life, essentially. Scars That Bind, Hits Differently, and The Way That I Want You, along with, I believe it's 3 or 4 other songs that we brought to life with a cast, streaming on April 15th. It's all about the album right now and the film, so lots to come with that.
Yeah, you just recently released a brand new single. I heard it yesterday, and I ain't gonna lie to you, it kind of put me in that oldies kind of Beatles vibe.
Thank you. Yeah, when I wrote The Way That I Want You, I wrote it during the start of the pandemic. I was honestly, I've been writing this album since 2014, and some of those songs from 2014 are on the record. So it's from 2014 up until 2021. I essentially was writing this record. Way That I Want You, I kind of wanted my own old school vibe song that I could just go down the coast with and jam out to. And that's what was born out of that song. The world's kind of a dark place right now, especially from the pandemic to everything else going on. I wanted this lighthearted, falling in love kind of first love vibe. And Way That I Want You was born, and now it's out there in the world. In my mind, when I wrote this, I wrote it about, innocence and falling in love and that aspect of first love. But then when we got in the studio, I knew we were doing the film, so I kind of adjusted my thoughts and how it could fit into a plot of an overall story and where it falls into, and when the audience watches the film, it'll make more sense, I think. But it's strong enough to stand on its own. I'm very proud of that song. I'm glad you get the old school vibe in there. Beatles is one of the references. At the start of the pandemic, the 1975 released a song called If You're Too Shy to Let Me Know. And I really wanted my own version of that. I brought that in as a reference, and that's how all the synths got in the track. And it just helped that the song was recorded in Malibu. The whole album was recorded in Malibu. So I had this mountain/beach backdrop to help me get into the mood of what The Way That I Want You is.
Your music lifestyle. I know that you're from San Francisco, and I know that you're living in Los Angeles now. What's the music lifestyle been for you? I mean, has it been much of a difference? How have you been enjoying?
LA has more opportunities for the music. San Francisco is home. It's just that there's not a lot of opportunities for music in SF, especially since the pandemic. There's not much you can do. LA, things are opening up now. Performances are starting up again. And I just feel like LA is the place to go. You can leave and go and write your story, which is essentially what I did in San Francisco. Come back to LA, bring the story there and bring it to life in new ways that you didn't expect to bring it to life. And just the vibe of the music there, everywhere else is kind of cutthroat. But the local musicians, I think we're all pretty supportive of each other. And we need that nowadays because you don't get that often from your peers. And I've noticed that throughout the crowds there that I've performed with recently, with other musicians, that it's just this support that is, that's very much so needed nowadays. And the music is just livelier there. I don't know, something happens when you bring your work back to LA and you create there and you expand upon the story. It just adds a level of depth. Honestly, I don't think I would have gotten in SF. The words may have came out of myself and onto the pen and paper here in SF. To bring it to LA, that's where it really was brought to life.
Knowing that you've been performing, what can you say that you enjoy about performing?
For me, it's split between a studio and a stage. I've been saying that a lot lately. I'm at home at both. I love performing. I've been performing since I was 13 years old. I've been doing this since I was 13. So that for me has always been home, more alive up there on stage, and that anything is possible. I think a lot of people in our industry kind of get a little stage fright sometimes. When I'm up there, it feels like home, and I'd rather be there than anywhere else. So it was kind of depriving during the pandemic to have that taken away. And it's still a little bit of a cautious line we have to walk on now because, the world is ever changing and we want to, our safety matters and everyone else's safety matters as well, especially considering with my illness. I have to be very careful with what I do now moving forward with the pandemic out there in the world. Being at home on stage, it just feels like I'm reunited with someone that I haven't been with in a long time. And it's been great to do shows. I have one on Sunday next week at the North End of Hollywood. And then I get to play the iconic Viper Room next month on April 15th, the same day that the film starts streaming. So It's a little overwhelming to have that all at once, but I'm very excited for Viper Room. The fact that my name is on the actual ticket, I'm really stoked to be doing that event. It's just good to be home on stage. It's good to be home.
You've got a story that I think is pretty remarkable. You mentioned that you were sick for a while. You had glaucoma, 7 major eye surgeries, hundreds of days of treatment. How did you continue to motivate and push yourself? And I would also think that your debut album and with the film, that it has to be about that and just your overall breakthrough, right?
Yes, I feel like the album and the film. In the film, I play Roy Paco. Not me, same name, not me. That kind of has its own plot, but still, it's very relatable to what I've gone through in my life. The album, on the other hand, is through and through my story for the last 8 years. And even before that, I would say I have been asked this: what is the album? What is the film about? I feel like it's a recoming of age. My early 20s, I was deprived of that because I was essentially living in the hospital in and out with these surgeries and the treatments. I remember when I turned 21 years old, I was in the hospital getting treatment for my eye and miserable. And these surgeries are so draining. And I'm so lucky that I don't have to be going through that right now. I'm currently in a form of remission where I can go and do this record and travel a little bit more now. But I still go back to the hospital every 6 months to check in and make sure that the eye is stable enough and that I'm okay to be out there in the world to continue doing what I want to do. It was really hard when this all started. I was 19 and could not see at all out of my eye. I thought it was allergies or something, and went to the hospital and found out that I had a cataract of a 75-year-old within my right eye. I'm 19. I don't know what a cataract is. They had to explain it to me and sent me to a specialist, rushed me into surgery after I saw the specialist because that's not normal. No 19-year-old should have a 75-year-old's cataract, nor did they, nobody knew how I got it. I myself to this day still don't know how I got it. After the first surgery, stable for a while, I would say for a good month, glaucoma came. And I didn't know what that was either until it was explained to me. My doctor at the time said, we have to monitor you because your pressure just continues to go up. That's not healthy. That's not normal. That's why you're experiencing pain in your eye. When the eye had the pain, it's like somebody's trying to poke it out of you. It was just excruciating. And it put me in a really dark place because when you're going through that, especially I'm young at the time. So even though I had people in my life, I was still feeling very alone throughout that process because everyone else that was going through this is either like 75 and up. Of course, we can relate on the level of, okay, we're experiencing this pain together. They're not my age, and everyone else my age is either going to college or out exploring the world. And I'm in the hospital getting 3 needles in my eye a day. So was not easy, but I had to make a choice. I could either be miserable in the bed and just cry and suffer my way through the rest of my life, or I could get up and do something about it. And I chose the latter, to get up and do something about it. I know people my age would probably be ashamed of getting up with a stick and walking, but I wanted to test the limits and see what I could do and take what I was given and make something better out of it. Because regardless of the pain and the suffering that I went through, you have to deal with it, but you can take all that pain and the suffering and turn it into something better. Like, I knew I was given this for a reason, and I'm not going to question why the glaucoma came in my life. Making the record and the film and everything else, to come, I'm actually grateful that it happened because it's made me better in ways that I didn't know I could be. And it's made me stronger in ways that I didn't even know I had that strength within me to deal with. If something more difficult was to come along the way for me, it's not as difficult as what I already went through. And anything else for me is more so a piece of cake than dealing with those surgeries and whatnot. And the fact that I was given 5 to 15 years with the eyesight. I'm on year 8 now, year 8 as of last month. I don't believe it's going to go away anytime soon. I'm very optimistic about it, and I try my best to take care of it. And my doctors and I have worked so hard to come to where we are now. That's why I'm very cautious with the world and everything going on with the pandemic, because if you have glaucoma, you get COVID, it's a little bit worse for you. And I ended up with COVID in January as well. And I learned that. So you do feel it a little bit different if you have the underlying illness when you get COVID. I wouldn't change anything with this eye of mine. I'm very grateful for the doctors that have worked so hard and the nurses that have taken care of me. Because without them, I couldn't have found the strength within me to get up and stand on my own and go out there and look for a second chance to do it all right. I continuously say there's a song on my album called Second Chance to Do It All Right. First song I ever wrote for this record. Very strange when I wrote it. I was just not in the mood. I was already so down and depressed with everything. My eye wasn't even looking like a human. I looked like a character from like Monsters Inc. or something, and was ashamed of myself. I was embarrassed. But something happened there that day that I just felt the light a little bit differently. And I got up and this song poured out of me. And I knew in that moment that I had to move forward. This illness is bigger than myself. And one of these days, there's going to be another person like myself, young and scared and not knowing what to do. And they're going to feel like they have no one, but they could stumble upon this album, and this album and my words and my story could be the person that I needed when I didn't have that. That's my perspective on the glaucoma and where I've been and everything moving forward.
I know that since you were going through so much, there was an artist that you looked up to, Ben Rector.
Ben Rector was and still is one of my biggest inspirations for this record and as a songwriter in general. When I got sick, I stumbled upon music that I normally don't listen to, and Ben was a part of that list there. I started listening to a lot of country and folk and experimenting in that genre, and that's eventually how this album was born. And people may not really hear that with Way That I Want To and Scars and Hits Differently, but literally every genre is on this album, and it's still cohesive, so there's something for everyone within there. Ben Rector, as a songwriter, I heard a song of his called If You Can Hear Me. And that song there, it really changed my perspective as a writer. I was like, oh, you can put these feelings into words like this. And I come from the pop world, and really through Ben's music and other artists as well, I started stripping down my thoughts and thinking in other ways that, okay, I can write this way and approach it this way. And I believe that album was called The In-Between, Ben Rector's record. And that record just really shaped me as a writer now, along with other artists. Like I said, I started listening to a lot of country. Dolly Parton was on that list. Taylor Swift, the way that she writes so in depth with her lyrics and about everyone in her life really was a perspective that I took. You know, I was going through all these different emotions, and I think people will see that on the record. Obviously, Scars That Bind has this alternative with the rap included in it. Hits Differently is very punk and grunge. They are those songs are those genres because that's how I felt. I was angry, and when you're upset and angry, you're not going to go write a pop song or, you know, a sad ballad. You want to scream, essentially. And that's how we got into the grunge and the punk. But by the end of the record, I feel like I end at peace with, there's a country song at the end of the record that I'm really proud of that leads us out, and I feel like it leads me into my next chapter of my life. And I feel like I couldn't have gotten these songs without the inspirations that I drew from these artists like Ben. And I hope to work with those kind of artists one day because they're just so in-depth with their writing. And I listened to Ben's new album the other day, and I said, this is still very much so where I would like to be in my life, in my 30s, going forward, to write in that way, because it's just so, there's a spiritual connection. It's the kind of connection I want to take moving forward.
In regards to your debut album that you're releasing, what do you feel is the best song? That
changes on a daily basis. It's my whole story, and I have a connection of all of them. But at the end of the day, I will always say track 12. It's the truth because it wraps the whole thing into one, and it's a song called Memories that will stick with me for life. It's the country song, and I always tell everyone I love, it's not just my story, it's our story, because people forget that when you're going through this kind of stuff, you may be going through it, but everyone else in your life is going through it in a different way than you. It was very difficult for my parents to have to go through this with me and to watch me. And like I say in the song, there's a line in there in the bridge that I wrote specifically about my parent, how my dad would hold my hand as the needle pushed on through, because they were in that room and they had to be there. Regardless of me technically not being a minor anymore, they needed someone in there with me while I was receiving these treatments. It was very difficult on everyone. And I always say that song is a overall summary and perspective of the last 8 years of my life, but it's also included with their story because it is their story as well. They're part of my story, and that song there is just really special for me. The whole album is, but on a daily, it's between that one and I think it's track 4 or 3. Don't quote me on that. I think it's 4, which is the next single, Behind Those Closed Doors. I've always wanted an Aretha Franklin kind of type of ballad, and that's exactly what I hope that people can see in this record. So yeah, those two there. I love when my songs take the more soulful route, just because that's where my home is at. Not that I don't love the grunge and the punk. I do, very much so. Especially, we got a lot of our anger somehow, sometime, and our frustrations and how we're feeling. Memories, though, take a look out for that one. That one there is my whole heart.
What is the best advice that anyone has given you?
Own your work. Own your work through and through, and stand by your work, because nowadays some artists, they backtrack and they're like, oh, we didn't mean to do it like that back in the day. You didn't mean to do it like that back in the day because you were in that moment. Some people look back at their career and they say, why did we do it that way? And even I would say that at the beginning, making this record, I would look back at things that I would do when I was 13 through like 15, and why did I do it that way? But now, after going through what I've gone through with my illness, I appreciate everything. And by owning your work, I think you honor your past. I think it's important to honor your past because that is what's going to shape your future. To make sure that my music is owned specifically by me and no one else is very important, because that's my words and that's my story. If someone were to take that away from me, it's kind of like taking your self-worth away from someone. But owning your work, I would say, is the most important thing for me. And standing by your work, owning and standing by your work, because your truth matters and your truth should be heard.
We were talking yesterday and you mentioned about, some of the things that you went through, abuse and being queer.
The abuse for me was one of the major reasons why I think we made this record the way we made it. It was my breaking point during the pandemic, to see things float back up. And when you're locked inside, your thoughts are locked inside with you. And once again, taking it back to when I first got sick, I could either sit there and do nothing about it or finally speak up. We're scared to speak up, and we're scared to speak our truth and tell people what happened. You have to be careful with what you say. For me, it was just, I didn't care anymore. I wanted Scars That Bind to release. I wanted people to know. I can't hide that in me forever. It's not something that you can live with. You live with it, but you find a new way to live with it. And it's all, for me, when it comes to that, it was about flipping it on its head and speaking up for the people that need it, because some people aren't strong enough to do that yet. And if you could be that little voice that is in their head, and that line there in Scars That Bind, you don't know what it's like for me when I close my eyes and I try to sleep. My mind replays every day on a loop, never ending repeat. And it replays. And I always say healing does not happen in a straight line. You're continuing to heal every single day. With this record, I'm continuing to heal every single day now. Album as a whole, from Scars That Bind is the opening track, obviously. It's a whole journey of healing, but when you get to the end and you reach a new level of healing, it's time to continue healing in new ways. And as a survivor of abuse, my hope is that songs like Scars, or even the last song on the record that's called Complete, I hope we find a level of peace within us somehow to move forward daily, because it's a roller coaster to go through this every single day. And my mind replays all the pain you inflicted on me every day on a loop, never ending repeat. Just because you're moving forward and you're healing doesn't mean you don't forget. For me to speak up was the first step to a larger form of healing. As for being queer, it was very important for me to show who I am inside. Prior to this debut album, I was working with other people, and they did not want me to be truly who I was, which I understand. In this industry, you have to play the game in order to, be in it. I wanted to 100% be myself, and authentically myself as well. Being queer is a part of that, and that's a part of my identity, and I'm not changing that. I'm not erasing it. We're going to move forward with that. And it was very important for me to put that aspect into this album. And not only that, the film, it's very much so represented within the film, but it doesn't overshadow it. That's one thing that I wanted to make sure. Being gay is not the main plot of the film. It's just a part of the character. I feel like some people make a big deal about that sometimes, like, oh, that's the whole point of it. It's just, no, it's not the whole point of it. It's just another element of a person's identity. And I really wanted to showcase this form of representation of these two men that fall in love in the film. My character and Austin Charles, played by Austin Smith, to show them falling in love in a way that just feels so normal and human, as opposed to something so stereotypical that people are used to seeing in LGBTQ. And I just wanted something normal because we're normal people that go through normal things. And I think people treat us like we're not so normal, even though who we love may be different. Very much so has the same beating heart as a straight person. Being queer for me, I just wanted to show a whole nother level of who I am and my identity that I never got to show before. So now I finally get to be me in that aspect, and I feel more rounded and more whole, that I get to speak up about things like the abuse or my illness and being queer. So that's all that, man. It's all one large story, and I feel for me it's come full circle with this album.
Now, if you were a song, what would it be and why?
The Story by Brandi Carlile, just because it talks about her life and where she's been, just her story, and how a story shows where a person, what a person has gone through and where a person has been. And for me, I personally related to that so much because I've obviously gone through a lot, and my story is very complex and very narrow with its edges and delicate. And that song there is very delicate, very powerful, and very poignant about this woman who is talking about her life's journey. After that song, I got more into her catalog, and I was like, she still had more stories to tell. And I hope people will feel the same way about me after they hear this record, that I still have many more stories to tell after the last track on this album.
In regards to music now, would you agree that it's best to learn and study old music and its history?
Yes, everyone's back catalog, especially older stuff. It is important because for me, the Beatles and the Bee Gees and Elvis really inspired the sound of certain songs that I was going for. I grew up on Michael Jackson. I love Michael. Part of the reason why I wanted to do a visual film is because I saw Michael's videos growing up, and I was like, I want that. I want that kind of level of storytelling. That sound, it's so specific to that time of an artist's life and that time period in general. That's specifically part of the reason why The Way That I Want You has that old school vibe to it, because I studied those old songs and I continuously listen and go back. I'm very big on vinyl. I'm sure you've seen that. I love vinyl. There's something very special about popping in a record and listening to it on that format as opposed to listening to it on streaming, just because you hear more things and you hear the songs differently, and you kind of get a different perspective on the story that they're telling as well throughout the music, be it the lyrics or the music behind it. So yeah, I do feel like it's important. I listen to a lot of oldies on vinyl specifically for that reason, so I can study it more and get to know more about, different genres and different sounds. And I hope that shows on my record as well, because we really did pay attention to other people's sounds, tried to adapt that and adopt it into what a Lucian Baza sound would sound like.
Do you feel like an artist needs a specific skill to be successful?
Lots of drive and heart. If your heart is not in it, then you're never going to reach the destination that you want to reach. If you're doing it just to do it, then what's the point of doing it? Everyone has a reason for why they pursue this career and why they head down this route. But if there's a point where you get lost and you don't want to do it, then stop for a second. And if you find it within yourself that you still want to continue down this path, continue down. Definitely drive and heart, because for me, that's the most important thing. If my heart is not in this, then I'm not giving 100% of myself. And if another artist's heart is not in it, then they're not giving all of themselves as well. And, people want something that they can relate to and incorporate into their lives. And if a person doesn't have that kind of ambition within their heart, then it's just not going to work.
Knowing that you've released a film that's coming out soon, and knowing that you're going to be releasing a debut album, what can we expect from you in the future plans, and what are some of the future goals that you want to accomplish?
I want this album to help people. That for me is my main goal. I want to travel with it. I want to perform it live, and I think we're getting glimpses of what that could look like, especially with Viper Room on the 15th of April and moving forward. What does myself as a live artist look like? And that's something that I want to explore, because, these songs were made in Malibu in this beautiful studio with that beautiful backdrop, but they deserve to come to life on stage as well. So I think we'll see more live performances from myself. I would love to continue acting. I really love that. I love doing that within the film. I loved playing the character, bringing his story to life, but bringing elements of my life into it. And definitely more music. You know, track 13 on the album. I hope people see that there's a little dot, dot, dot there, that there's still more stories to come. Writing my next record already. I just started a few weeks ago, trying to figure out what that's going to look like. Definitely more music, more stories, and more live shows, because the stage is where these songs were meant to be. And, you know, they're meant to be in front of an audience so that way we can heal together. That's, I think, one thing I want to make clear is that when we're in the same room, I hope people are in that element with me for 30 minutes to an hour and feel these words within their heart so that we can move forward and, you know, one step at a time, every day, until we're out alive together.
And as far as a future collaboration,
That's a toughie. I've always said Miley Cyrus, so diverse, and I feel like we're cut from the same cloth in that way. Her music literally spans every genre. Miley, just because she's so versatile, we would hit it off in that aspect.
and Roy, it's been such a pleasure to interview you. I'm glad that we're able to have this time together. I'm so proud of you and what you've been able to do in your career. I'm looking forward to seeing the film, looking forward to hearing the album. Just want to say I appreciate your time. Wish you all the best.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.